So yesterday, we announced that we're going to renew our look at trying to do those simple things to keep us safe in this interim period. Over the last several months, we've watched our numbers rise. In October, we had 74 new cases a day. By the end of November, 234 cases per day. And that 7-day average is about 231. So this is not going away. We've seen our percent positivity that was down in the 3%, but a month ago it was about 4.2%. And at the same period, a month later, it was over 8.4%, but it's hovering about 5.6% of the people tested right now. Our partners over in Pasco and Hillsborough County have seen numbers at 7 to 9%. So as a region, we're seeing our numbers increase. And the concern with that is when it increases, the community spread occurs, that infects people within our entire region that are both healthcare workers, but what it really does is stress our hospital capacity, our medical capacity. And it makes it very difficult for us to meet all the competing needs for our residents. So today we're hosting a Facebook Live to answer questions, try to clear up some of the misinformation about our ordinance, and then try to make sure that we all are engaged in an effort to try and get through this last hurdle until we have a vaccine.
Barry, really quick, you just mentioned those numbers. Can you speak to how many are symptomatic versus not symptomatic versus folks who may be hospitalized based on those tests? Or
I don't have those numbers in front of me, Sheriff. I don't know if you do. But I think the one thing to remember is, even whether you're symptomatic or not, if you're a carrier, you're going to infect somebody that may, in turn, go in and they may be a CNA in a long-term care facility. They may they may have an elderly parent at home, or they're visiting someone. So, just because it doesn't impact you doesn't mean it doesn't impact our community. And as that community spread occurs, then it's very hard to manage and contain.
Well, and one of the things we know with this virus is that there are a considerable number of people that are asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic. And the asymptomatics and the pre-symptomatics are the greatest concern because they don't know to take the precautions, and then they get in groups. And that is the reason for the mask, or one of the biggest reasons for the mask is because people just don't know whether they have it or not. Or if they're pre-symptomatic, that they may be developing symptoms in the next few days, and when they're going about their business, then they're infecting others, and this is how we get the community spread. So the asymptomatics and the pre-symptomatics are of great concern.
Sheriff, let's talk about your comments yesterday. You kind of implied that some of the resurgence we're seeing may be linked to bars and restaurants. Can you talk a little bit more about how you arrived at that and whether or not you think perhaps the governor's adjustment to 100% capacity, how that could have impacted and played a role?
Yeah, so we checked 2,800 bars and restaurants in Pinellas County, and we found with the bars that there was 41% noncompliance. So that's pretty substantial to have that number of locations and number of checks where people aren't complying. And I attribute some of it, at least, maybe a significant portion of it, to a lack of understanding of what is required here in Pinellas County. And perhaps some of it is that there's a viewed conflict, which there's not, with the state's directive on this. Because one of the things that the governor has made clear is that the counties and the cities have permission, have authority, have the right to enact local ordinances that the local jurisdiction thinks is important to maintain safety in that community. And that's what Pinellas County has done. And the only thing that the governor said is that there can't be a fine or a penalty imposed as to an individual. Nothing precludes any fines or penalties or compliance by businesses. Now also, with that is the governor didn't say that the ordinance itself doesn't have to be followed. didn't invalidate the ordinance requiring masks or invalidate any obligation on the part of an individual, on the part of all of us individually. The only thing that the governor said is that if you violate it, you can't be fined or penalized. The ordinance is still in place. It's still a legal requirement. People still need to follow it because it is the law. So that's the situation that we're in.
Yesterday, you talked about there are going to be some new notices posted, and we have some questions about medical exemptions and how they're part of the ordinance, but they are not being honored in some businesses. What do you say to that?
So, for the longest time now, over the last many months, I think we've talked about this and been very clear about it. Every single business, any place, has the absolute right to run their business the way they want. They have people in the business that they want and not have those in there that they don't. Just like no shirts, no shoes, no service. If you don't want to have anybody in your business that is wearing purple t-shirts, you can throw them out. If you don't want to have people in your business that are not wearing masks for any reason, including because they have a medical issue, you can throw them out. So the ordinance itself does have an exception in it for people who cannot wear a mask due to a medical reason. So what that means is that the ordinance doesn't apply to you. But businesses can have rules regardless of the ordinance, regardless of any medical condition that do apply to you, and they can't exclude you. So it's a property right, it's a property interest, it's a right to run your business however you want. And if you want people in there, and this is a hypothetical, but if a business wanted to say, I will only allow people in here that are wearing masks and face shields, or you're not coming into my business, they could do that. Now, they may not get a lot of business, but they could do that. If they wanted to say that I want everybody in here wearing masks, if you can't wear a mask, I just don't want you in your business. I don't want to hear the reason. I don't want to hear the excuse. It doesn't matter how legitimate it is that the ordinance may not apply to you, but my business rules apply to you, and they are free to do that.
So with the notices going out, do you plan to do any additional compliance checks with businesses?
Yes.
And you kind of covered it, but just to be clear, yesterday was just kind of a reminder to kind of re-up support. There's no change to the ordinance, is that right?
Yes, there's no change to the ordinance. We're not adding any additional requirements. The requirements are still that employees in restaurants and bars must wear a mask anytime, inside or outside. Customers wear a mask unless seated. Okay, so once you sit down. What we're really trying to do is get people to spread out. That's really the whole goal here. So tables and chairs must be 6 feet apart and no groups greater than 10. You must be seated to be served. So you can't be standing around the bar, and dance floors are prohibited. And that goes to the gist of the ordinance.
So we have a question. I'm not sure which order specifically it's related to, but the question is, the order states that businesses cannot be limited to less than 50% of indoor capacity. What about outdoor? And if a business if in order to meet the 6-foot capacity is less than 50%, what are their options?
Well, first, we don't have a capacity limitation. So we were following the state's order. So when they had 50%, 75%, we just simply followed their state order. When they went to 100%, we left that in place. But our underlying provisions within our ordinance are still in place, which is the separation between tables. So that applies indoor or outdoors.
Do you have information on how Pinellas County is doing compared to other counties in the state?
Sure, we do. I mean, I think I said that in my opening. In Pasco County, they've been up around 9%. Hillsboro's about 7%. We're almost at 6, 5.85. So it varies around that. But we've been up. We've been as high as 8. We've been down. Now we're down, to the upper 5s. But we operate as a region, and so that's the concern. We're seeing other metro areas that have high rates over in South Florida, Orlando, and other places. But we also know that just as that happened before, as we saw cases increase in the north, then we saw cases increase here. And so we're trying to be proactive and prepare. We've kind of let our foot off the gas. We've started trying to get back to normal, which we understand. But we've just got to reengage. We've got to think about how to take these simple measures, not close down, not reduce business, but just try to separate out to be safe to where we can get through this last period of time.
Sure, we kind of talked about it with previous Q&As, but can you just recap the authority under law for these mask ordinances?
Well, sure. The emergency powers, which are in Chapter 252 of the Florida statutes, allow the state, the governor, to pass executive orders or to enact executive orders. It allows county commissions and city commissions throughout Florida to declare a state of emergency, and as a result of that state of emergency, to impose certain requirements or restrictions. And also, counties or cities can also pass ordinances. An ordinance is different. It's actually law that is effective a statute. And so they could go about it in two ways. One, which what we have done here in Pinellas County, which is the ordinance regarding masks. Or it could be done under the emergency declaration and the emergency powers in Chapter 252. Now, one of the reasons that Pinellas County decided to go the ordinance route, because anything under Chapter 252 and the emergency declaration and the emergency orders that can come from it, any violations of that are criminal. And Pinellas County didn't want to do that. You know, we're really not looking to impose consequences. And by doing the ordinance, it created a civil violation and a fine schedule. First violation's $100, second one's $250, third one's $500. So it was done under the ordinance to really mitigate the potential impact and to try and do it in a softer way. So that's what the authority is, and it's really very broad authority.
Thanks, Sheriff. Yesterday, a lot of the talk was about bars and restaurants. What about other businesses? What are you seeing there, and are there notices available for those businesses?
So we try to address and are addressing what we see as the problem area. There's not perfection in the other businesses, but as we have looked at the other businesses based upon personal observations and some of the checks we've done and by the complaints and the feedback we received, I think by and large, as we really have seen from the beginning, is that the majority of these businesses are complying and are making an effort, and the people patronizing those businesses, the customers, are doing the right thing. Now, is it perfect? No, but there is no perfect. We're not looking for perfect. We're looking for substantial compliance, and I think we see that with the other businesses. We see it to a pretty decent degree with the restaurants, and I would say that the primary issue is with the bars, or those places that are they serve food, but they're more like a bar environment. So that's where the problem is, and that's what we're addressing is the problem. We're not doing it for the sake of doing it. We're not doing it because we want to cause anybody grief. We want these businesses not only to survive, we want them to thrive. We want them to succeed. But you know, if you get a whole bunch of sick people and the hospital system gets overwhelmed, and you end up having to set up field hospitals and tents because there's no room in the ICUs and the system can't handle it and they don't have the staff to handle it, there's not going to be anybody to go in your restaurant and bar and eat and drink. So, you know, that's the whole reason behind it. We're not doing it because this is something we enjoy. We're doing it because we see a problem and we see a need, and we're trying to do the responsible thing by the community.
Back to the emergency orders and what you talked about there. How is that quantified? How are those balanced, and how does that decision-making process work for emergency orders in the county?
Well, Barry, you can probably talk to that as far as, because it's, you know, really the county commission has the authority over it. So
right.
If you want to go and elaborate on that, you can.
Well, okay, so the county declared an emergency based upon the pandemic, and so there's certain powers that are vested to the county commission that they can do that with. We put that in our own order, and we structured the conditions that allow for us to impose that order. So they did that, I don't know, forget the date, early in the spring, and we've held with that. And so that gives us the ability to, in this case, impose a mask ordinance, but to take any and all actions necessary to keep us safe. That included purchasing PPE, you know, protective equipment, and all the things to support our hospitals and our nursing homes, to conduct inspections, in facilities and things like that. So we've talked a lot about the ordinance, but there's a lot of things that came out of that emergency order that are steps that we've taken to try to keep our residents safe.
Thank you. So, Sheriff, you had a personal experience with COVID-19. What was different about it compared to a cold or another flu?
Everything. It's not the flu. It's not a cold. It's a miserable, nasty illness. And you know, the aches, the headaches, the sore throat, the fatigue, the loss of taste. I still don't have my taste back. In fact, I went to the doctor this week and tried some different medications to try and help it out. So it's been over 4 months now. So it is absolutely not just the flu, not a cold. And I would consider the case I had to be more of the mild to moderate. And so my experience with it was terrible. And I'm pretty resilient, but it was miserable. And it lasted, really a long time. It took me before the symptoms subsided, and they still haven't because I still don't have my taste back, really about 30 days. The first 10 days, you're fatigued, it's the worst headache I've ever experienced, and I didn't even have a fever. So, like I said, my case was on the mild to moderate side. The people that I know that have experienced it, have had such severe symptoms. Of course, a lot of people end up in the hospital with it. So, this notion is that it's no big deal, and if you get it, it's not the end of the world. Well, it may not be the end of the world, but it is a big deal.
Thanks, Sheriff. Back to restaurants, are there any limitations as far as a restaurant having a food pickup line or anything like that in lieu of servers or?
No, the business can operate as they, wish to operate. We're trying to just set up the conditions for spreading people out. In fact, in one of the pictures the sheriff had, you had people, they were socially distanced, and they went up, they got their food, and they moved off. And anyway, each business is different. That's what's made it so hard. We get a lot of questions. We did in the very beginning about, can I do this or that? And besides originally they had the capacity limitation from the state, our ordinance is really designed for you to set up the business how you need to set it up. Just socially distance people. Take a chair or two out in between the groups and do the things that you can do to where you can operate your business, but then have people be safe.
So one last question, kind of moving away from yesterday's topics, but any additional tips from the county for gathering during the holidays?
That's a question that keeps coming up. It's on everybody's mind. We've put out guidance to say, try to stay within your family unit. Avoid going to big holiday parties where you have people that you don't normally interact with. That increases the risk. It's no different than what we're trying to do here. It's trying to take those minimum steps that you can take to where you try to prevent the spread of coronavirus during this time period. So the more you can contain and stay into small groups, the less chance that you'll have for picking up the virus and spreading it to somebody else.
So we appreciate everybody's questions and tuning in today. We can come back in the future and address any concerns or questions and provide information. And hopefully in the near future, we'll have the vaccine in place and be able to start talking about distribution efforts, how that's going to happen, and get this to a point where it can be in the rearview mirror. So we still have a ways to go. Really asking for everybody's help, everybody's cooperation. Help us help you. But we appreciate you tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.